Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitical Trends, where truth matters. Excited to be with you as always. I hope for my American viewers, hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I'm very excited because my dear friend Carl Zha is here. He's right here. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Dr. O. How are you?
Oh, please call me David. Drop the doctor part. You and I, we're friends. So, how are you, Carl? How's the
I'm
family?
good. I'm good.
Good,
Family
good,
is
good,
good as
good to
well.
see you. Good to
Thanks,
see you
David.
as well. To those, by the way, guys, to those who do not know who Carl Zha is, which you should by now, Carl is the host of the Silk and Steel podcast. Very interesting channel. I'm gonna put the link for you in the chat box. Please make sure to check it out if you truly want to learn about history. Carl is your source right there. And I'm not saying it to be Mr. Nice. You guys know how I operate. So he's also, Carl talks about the China, about history, about culture, about politics. You know, that's someone I turn to when I need to know something about that part of the world and the rest around the world for that matter. So he's based in Bali. That's why we are connecting with him from. So for you guys, for the community, and once again, what I'm going to be covering today with Carl, there will be about 3 or 4 key topics. We'll be talking about G20 summit we just concluded. We'll be talking about Japan and China tensions. But from this perspective, I'm going to ask Carl to share with us the history of the islands, where the tensions are. Senkaku Island, as is known in English version, because Carl knows this part of the history here. Then I'm going to conclude with really an insight that I want to get from Carl. This has to do with the China's naval capabilities, and we'll put all this in perspective. So you are in for a treat. Get some popcorn and get some tea or coffee, and let's enjoy it. So, all right, Carl, I'm going to start by asking, please, your overall assessment. How do you assess the G20 summit, which just concluded in South Africa? Of course, the US was absent, but the rest of the G20, they shrugged their shoulders, saying, so what? If the Americans are not there, life goes on. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, U.S. is the one that's slapping tariff on everybody, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and it
true.
turns out, the U.S. had to back off when China said no. I think the whole tariff war showed that rather than United States, China is the actual responsible leader, global leader. That can confront the bully. And for US, I think it's a special time because now US is beset by internal problems. Trump himself is facing with a revolt among the MAGA ranks, so it can't be bothered. It's because Trump really never really cared for those multilateral organization anyway. He doesn't believe in paying for other countries, in his words. He feel like everybody just have to pay for the privilege of being the American imperial system. So for him, it makes no sense to give further credibility to these international organizations. If anything, since Trump's first term, U.S. has been actively destroying all these international organizations that it self help funded after World War II, because he feel like it no longer works for U.S. anymore. It felt constrained, and so it's now Trump administration is pursue like unilateralism, at its own pace. So G20, it doesn't really mean anything for Trump. And on the other hand, for the rest of the world, they, as you mentioned, they're moving on. They're fine. U.S. can they can also see U.S. is stuck dealing with its own problems. But the life must go on for the rest of us.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Carl. When you mentioned about the problems, I live here. We do have serious problems. It's just the government and the media is not willing to let the American people know about it. And I'm talking about the unemployment, for example, that is now jacking up to 4.9% here in the US. media staying silent about it. So that's to me a hint for what lies ahead. You mentioned about the I won't use the term the irrelevancy of the G20, but the way I can look at it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, could it be because also we are seeing the emergence of some other key economic blocks, the likes of BRICS and the likes of ASEAN? That is good. That is in the case of BRICS, their GDP output is about 35 to 36% of the world output. So could it be that the world is saying, you know what, we see in the emergence of these blocks, but the United States is concerned even more about those economic blocks? What do you think?
Well, I mean, G20 could have been a forum where BRICS countries and the G7 countries come together
Mm-hmm.
to have a meaningful dialogue and exchange. But what's happening is the G7 member nations, they're just blind followers of Washington. It's like it doesn't seem like Europe on its own is ready to pursue strategic autonomy,
Mm-hmm.
to have an equal exchange for the global South country on their own term yet. Right now, they're still acting as appendages of Washington, whether
Mm-hmm.
on the issue of Ukraine war or on the ongoing tension with China. I mean, it actually doesn't make sense for Europe to be in a security competition with China, because China is so far from Europe. Like
Yeah.
they're on the either ends of the Eurasian continent. China poses no security threat to Europe, yet they're acting as if China is, in order to justify expanding NATO to Pacific, which is really really outrageous. Like they're just doing this in order to do U.S. bidding. And so this is why I don't see G20 hold too much meaning under such context.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely correct about NATO, and we're gonna address this when we get to this segment, when we're gonna be talking specifically about the NATO role. I had a chance to read a white paper about it 2 years ago, in which it mentioned that we're gonna they say, and I'm paraphrasing here, we're gonna have to categorize China as the enemy because it represents a threat for NATO. And I was like, wait a minute, you are here in Europe and China is all the way on the other side of the world. That just doesn't add up unless there are some other plans, and exactly what's what it was. I want to get your insight, Carl, on the recent phone call that took place between President Xi Jinping and President Trump, in which Trump is planning on coming to China on April. One thing that comes to mind right away for me, and please elaborate more, whatever you like, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. One thing that it comes to mind is most the possibility that Donald Trump is going to ask President Xi Jinping for China to buy more U.S. treasuries. Would I be wrong in this assessment, Carl?
Well, this has been U.S. policy for ages. This is if people remember back in Biden administration, Janet Yellen keep on going to China. It's not just for the mushrooms. She's there. She wants China to buy U.S. debt. Because if you look at the Chinese purchase of U.S. Treasury, you went from the peak of $1.4 trillion to now somewhere under 700 billion. I mean, China already reduced its holdings by half, and instead of selling, China just holding the existing U.S. Treasury to maturity. They stopped buying new ones because China realized, like, why why are we financing U.S. government when we could deploy those surplus dollar elsewhere, like in the Belt Road project? And that's exactly what China has done. But that's not the U.S. goal. U.S. goal for China has always been that China should be a vast pool of cheap labor to manufacturing low-end, labor-intensive goods for the U.S. So, whether it's toys or shoes, but continue to recycle the dollar surplus they gain from the trade surplus back into the U.S. Financial system by purchasing U.S. debt. But China realized, but there's not much in it for us. So, why are we working our ass off for these paper IOUs? So they have diverged they have been divested from the
Mhm.
U.S. and this is what U.S. does not like. But about the phone call, because there was a lot of reporting around this. First Wall Street Journal came out claiming that this was the first time since 1990s that Chinese leader has request a call with White House. And then, so many pundits now came out and say, oh, yeah, because China needs us, why Xi
No.
Jinping is really panicking, he needs
Mhm.
Trump's help. And then a few days later, we get confirmation both from Washington and Beijing. It was, in fact, a call requested by the White House, by the
Sure.
U.S. side. So, I mean, that calls into question about credibility of Wall Street
Yeah,
Journal. Well, not for the first time.
of course.
And and then and more important part is right after the call,
Mhm.
the Chinese readout and the US readout is totally different. Donald Trump just tweeted, oh yeah, China pledged to buy more soybeans, and whereas I mentioned nothing about Taiwan or Japan, whereas in the Chinese readout they said they spend quite a bit time to talk about the Taiwan issue, and that China and US should be the guarantor of the post-war order, as the
Yeah.
victors of the World War II.
Yeah.
They should be guarantor of the post-war order. And this is a pointed, this is pointing at Japan, basically, because Japan
Yeah.
was a defeated party in World War II. And part of the post-war arrangement was that Japan gave up Taiwan back to China after 1945, and that China and Taiwan is part of China. And
Yeah.
this is the whole big tension that was caused by the Japanese Prime Minister's statement on if there's warship around waters of Taiwan, that's an existential issue for Japan, so we have to get involved militarily, which really crossed the reddest of the red line of China, because China has always maintained Taiwan is part of China. The
Yeah.
Taiwan issue is an issue between the Chinese people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait to resolve. Other parties should stay the F out. It's none of your
Yeah.
business. It's the internal Chinese matter. And by Japanese Prime Minister completely ditched this strategic ambiguity and claim that Japan will militarily intervene. This
Yeah.
this crossed a very serious red line for Beijing,
Yeah.
and it also invoke the old colonial memories when the whole reason Taiwan was separated from China in the first place was the result of the first Sino-Japanese War
Yeah.
of
War.
1894, 1895,
Yeah.
when China was forced to give up Taiwan to Japan as a Japanese colony, which it remained for 50 years until 1945. The Japanese surrender after World War II that gave up Taiwan to China. And
Yeah.
now that a prospect of the Chinese Navy flying the rising sun flag back to Taiwan, that's going to roil a lot of it's getting a lot of Chinese people upset. So
Yeah.
this is a major part of the Xi-Trump call. And afterwards, apparently Trump had a call with the Japanese Prime Minister Takichi and told her to calm the F down. And
Yeah.
this again, that was reported by Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
So people are also calling question of credibility of Wall Street. How much can we trust the
Of
Wall Street
course.
Journal reporting? Because
Yeah.
it's actually by the same person who reported that was Xi Jinping requested the meeting with Trump. In fact, it was totally otherwise. But
Yeah.
what we do know is that Japanese Prime Minister, after the call with Donald Trump, she just said the call was cordial, but released no further detail of the call. So
Yeah.
it does look like
No.
Trump did to tell her to
Yeah.
chill out a bit. This is don't ruin the temporary truce in
Yeah.
the U.S. China Cold War. The trade war, and especially don't jeopardize Trump's coming visit to Beijing next
In
year in
April.
April. Yeah,
Now,
because that's
speaking of that visit, Carl, beside what I mentioned earlier, well, in your opinion, is that just he wants a photo op with the President Xi Jinping, or what will be like common sense? What will be the objective of the trip?
well. Let's remember, Trump actually visited China in his first term,
Yeah,
unlike
he did.
Biden. So Trump is like he's always up for any
Yeah,
opportunity for photo op. He's being his nature as a TV reality TV show host. He would not give out such an opportunity. But
yeah,
and also Trump, he's a type of person, the personality that he respects strength, right? And he
yeah,
despises weakness. Like when Europe and Japan, they fawn all over him and like acting like good old puppy dogs.
yeah,
That only invite more contempt from Trump, because Trump has said himself he despises weakness. When China actually pushed back in the trade war
trade war.
and actually showed to US that China holds more cards at the table, uh, Trump, paradoxically, Trump respect that because Trump respects strength. He despises weakness, and so
Yeah,
so he is. And Trump always said, he has he respected President Xi Jinping and President Putin. He's always wanted to meet with them. So
yeah,
personally, I think he has not. He's not hostile toward the idea of meeting either with Xi Jinping or Putin or Kim Jong Un, right? Let's remember, which is a sharp contrast from the zombie presidency of Biden, who
yeah.
um, did not make that effort to. So I think this is also let's also remember Trump is still angling for that Nobel Peace Prize,
Peace
right? He
prize.
wants to
Oh
position himself as a great peacemaker.
yeah.
So he's also thinking about building his legacy now, because this is going to be his last term
Yeah,
as president anyway. And so there's that to think about. I think that yeah, for Trump it's great photo op opportunity. It's
yeah,
to shore up his legacy as a great peacemaker and to show himself with another strong world, with a strong world leader. That kind of bolster his own image
mm,
domestically, especially
mm,
when he's facing a lot of uh, pushback right now
yeah,
within United States over Epstein files. There's even a revolt among the MAGA ranks about U.S. Israel first policies,
yeah,
and why U.S. is continue to pursue on the path of interventionism abroad. Even though Trump came to power, promised he's going to end that. And on top of that, there's a lot of problem with Trump's trade war that introduced.
yeah,
U.S. soybean farmers, they're looking for handout now because they're not selling soybeans to China. China, even though they promise they're gonna look into address a trade imbalance, but they actually never promise a specific amount they would
hmm,
buy U.S. soybean. So Scott Bessent basically lies. Scott Bessent claimed that China committed to buy so
no,
many metric tons of U.S. soybean, but in the Chinese readout, they said nothing of that kind, and it actually makes sense. China already switched their supplier from
yeah,
U.S. to Brazil, which is a friendly BRICS country, right? So why would it make sense
it
for
makes sense.
China to kind of now ditch Brazil for U.S. and there's only like the soybeans that China source from United States, those
Hmm.
GMO soybeans, they're not fit for human consumption. Those are livestock feed,
You're right.
right? But there's only so many pigs in China to feed, right? I mean, like once they brought the Brazilian soybeans,
Yeah,
there's not going to be much left to source from United States, and those soybean farmers are the core Trump constituency. They're one of the the Republican base, and yet the whole Trump trade policy has been disastrous for them.
Yeah.
So Trump have all these like internal issue to deal with. So like a trip abroad where he's gonna be met with pompous and circumstance in Beijing, that would look good for his point of view. That would look good for him.
Well, the MAGA issues right here in the U.S. is very, very serious. You got even members of Congress that were supporters of him, like Taylor Greene, resigning from Congress. So you're absolutely correct where things are, except the media here is not talking openly about it, and this is why I like to bring those kind of issues to the fore. So at least my community here have a better understanding of this. So thank you very much for that, Carl. Truly appreciate you for that. Let's turn into the Japan-China tensions, because there is a lot to cover into this. And given your background in history, I figured we'll start with the island, the history of the islands, if you will be kind, Carl, just to give my community a brief understanding of how this came to be. Then we'll move into the geopolitical aspects of the tensions and the economic aspects of it. If you will.
Well, there is territorial dispute between China and Japan in the East China Sea over the Diaoyu Islands, but the main issue really is over Taiwan. All started with Taiwan, and everything started with the first Sino-Japanese War of 1894 and 1895, because the Diaoyu Islands, what Japanese call Sengaku, there were a group of uninhabited islets in the East China Sea. Now, up to China was the first one to map it, give it a name, Diaoyu Islands. And then in 1885, this after Meiji reform in Japan is starting to become industrial power. They were thinking about annexing the island. The Japanese internal minister petitioned the Japanese government to annex the island of Diaoyu Islands, but at the time, the Japanese Prime Minister Inoue said, "Well, okay, let's hold off for a second, because the Chinese map, Chinese already given a Chinese name, Diaoyu Island. They obviously claim it. Let's not cause our problem with China yet." This was 1885, 10 years before the first Sino-Japanese War. So, and this is internal Japanese official government document. So they put off because they are afraid to challenging China's claim. Then what happened in 1894, 1895 is that Japan defeated China in the first Sino-Japanese War. And then as a result of that, China had to cede the island of Taiwan to Japan as a Japanese colony. So at that juncture, Japan suddenly claimed, oh, this group of islands, the Diaoyu Islands, is actually no man's land. So it didn't belong to anybody. We're going to formally incorporate it into our territory. But during the Japanese colonial rule of Taiwan, the set of island, Diaoyu Island, it was administered from the Japanese colonial governorship of Taiwan, as part of Taiwan. So, by the way, the name, the Japanese name Sengaku, is actually a literal translation from the English name, Pinnacle Islands. Sengaku is a Japanese for pinnacle. So that gives you idea how that name originated, because the Chinese has named the island Diaoyu Islands for since before the Ming Dynasty. They put it on maps and everything, and so Japan, they took the English name from the from the maps of Pinnacle Island, they translate it into Japanese and call it Sengaku. And now, as the settlement of World War II, Japan was supposed to give up Taiwan or all the surrounding islands back to China. Now, from China's perspective, that would have included the Diaoyu Islands. But what really happened was United States was actually in actual control of the islands. The U.S. Navy was using it as for target practice. and so this is something that was not challenged by the Chiang Kai-shek regime on Taiwan, because whatever, Chiang Kai-shek regime on Taiwan was a U.S. client state, so he didn't object to U.S. Occupation of the islands to use it for target practice. But what triggered this dispute was in 1971. So U.S. actually occupied the Okinawa island chain after World War II, and it was governed kind of under separately from Japan. And in 1971, there was a decision whether Okinawa should remain kind of under the as a U.S. colony, or should it be returned to Japan? Now, Okinawa itself, the Ryukyu island chain itself, also is actually tied to this dispute, because so Ryukyu is the Japanese pronunciation of Luchu, which is what the island called themselves. The Luchu island chain, they used to be an independent kingdom, and that has a very close diplomatic ties with China. It was part of the Chinese tributary system, and through the Ming and Qing dynasty, the Chinese emperors will routinely send envoys to the island to grant investiture, which is to officially confirm a new king of Luchu. And Luchu also, they concluded their own separate treaties with the United States when Commodore Perry sailed his black ship to East Asia. This is in the documents of U.S. Congress, and U.S. had treaties with the Kingdom of Luchu. So what happened is, after Meiji Restoration, Japan became an expansionist power. So around 1870s, Empire of Japan officially annexed the kingdom of Luchu. So that's when all these territory disputes start happening with China, because before, Japan homeland did not border China directly, right? China's immediate neighbor was the Kingdom of Luchu, which is already in a tributary status within the Chinese imperial system. So there was no dispute. There was no dispute about ownership of Diaoyu Islands, because historically, according to the travel documents, travelers between China and Luchu Islands, the people say once they leave the water of Diaoyu Island, then they're heading home to Luchu Kingdom, and so because of Japan annexation of Luchu Island, that's how they start to claim Diaoyu Island as part of the the rename. So the Japanese also rename. First they refer Luchu by the Japanese pronunciation Ryukyu Islands, but then they decide to rename the main island. They decide to call Okinawa Prefecture, and so but Diaoyu Islands, for the whole entire period of the Japanese colonization of Taiwan, was administered from Taiwan, right? So this is why, from the Chinese side, they assumed that Diaoyu Island should have been returned with the other islands around Taiwan to China, but it was not challenged again by the Chiang Kai-shek regime in Taiwan, because U.S. was a daddy, right? So U.S. can make use of the island however they want. But in 1971, when United States decided to return the Ryukyu island chain to Taiwan, to Japan again, at that time, U.S. put a vote to the islanders, and the island, the people of Okinawa, they thought, by voting for return to Japanese rule, that they will get rid of the American base, because their choice was whether to remain under the American protectorship or return to Japan. And so many of them opted for returning to Japan, but to their disappointment, nothing changed. The American military stayed in Okinawa, and so they're kind of get punished. They're getting like a sort of double jeopardy. But the dispute arose when United States, when they returned Ryukyu Island administration to Japan, they included the Diaoyu Islands. So that's when in 1971 both China, mainland China, and the regime on Taiwan protested this handover of U.S. Now, for U.S. government's official stance on this dispute, it officially takes no stance on the sovereignty issue of Diaoyu Islands, but yet they still give it to Japan. Handed the control over to Japan. And now, more recently, the United States State Department actually said, well, even though we take no stance on the sovereignty of the Diaoyu Islands, but since it's under control of Japan, you will still trigger the Japan-U.S. Security Pact if China were to militarily take over that place. So U.S. is still militarily pledged to defend the Diaoyu Islands, from China, even though it is officially it takes no stands on the sovereignty dispute. So this is like kind of strategic ambiguity. And United States intentionally kind of left a time bomb, like in the China-Japan relationship, because to let it continue to fester. And so right now, what we saw was a kind of increasing strident Japanese position on Taiwan, which is, the Japanese prime minister basically ditched the whole decade-long policy of strategic ambiguity, which is to say for U.S., the strategic ambiguity on Taiwan is to neither confirm or deny that we're going to get involved in a war over Taiwan, over status of Taiwan. Despite what Joe Biden said during his presidency, when he was asked, will we defend Taiwan? He said yes. But then the White House, came out and walked back to the statements like, Joe Biden didn't know what he was talking about. He was senile. Don't worry about him. But this current prime minister of Japan, she's definitely not a senile old man, right? I mean, there's no plausible deniability when she said what she said. And she, for her part, this is a long-term agenda for her. The particular faction of her party, the LDP, because she belonged to a particular right wing of the LDP, the Japanese ruling party, which has ruled Japan since most of the post World War II. Now, LDP itself is a pretty right-wing political organization, but she belonged to the right wing of the right wing political party, right? So she's like really on the extreme part of the spectrum. And for the Japanese nationalist politicians like her, their goal has always been, quote unquote, return Japanese to the normal country status. And what they consider a normal country is that Japanese must have a military that they can deploy abroad. And this has to do with the Japan's peacetime constitution, which was imposed on them by American after World War II, which says, especially Article 9 of the Peace Constitution, which says Japan should not have a military, but you can maintain a self-defense force for the self-defense of the Japanese home islands. And the Japanese right-wing politicians did not like that at all. So they have done their best, try to skirt around the issue or overturn Article 9 of the Peace Constitution. I mean, they, back in the day of Shinzo Abe, they tried to replace it completely with by saying, Japan should be able to act like a normal country, have its own military, and deploy wherever it wants. But the peace constitution is so popular among the Japanese general population because many rightfully saw it as a key cornerstone of Japan's post-war prosperity, because they thought it was because of the pivot away from militarism of World War II that allowed Japan to its economic miracle post-war.
Yeah.
So the peace constitution is still very popular on the Japanese populace. So the Shinzo Abe government decided, you know what, if we can't get rid of it, we'll just reinterpret it. We'll just reinterpret what it means. So they say, okay, well, yes, the idea is we have to maintain a self-defense force to defend Japan, but there will be some contingencies around the neighborhood of Japan that will threaten Japan's security. In that case, we should be allowed to deploy our territory. But even in that, like, they were talking about Taiwan, but even back then they were very carefully not to explicitly spell out Taiwan. Even though that's what they meant. What they really meant was like, okay, if U.S. were to get involved in wars around Japan, as a U.S. ally, we're obligated to help. And that means we will have to send out our quote-unquote self-defense force to waters around Japan. But this current prime minister, Takaichi, she kind of ditched away with all kind of pretense and said, okay, yeah, if something happens around Taiwan, that is this existential threat to Japan, which would necessitate us to get militarily involved. Now, what this made this sound especially grating to Chinese ear is because, even before World War II, from 1931 onwards, the Empire of Japan has used the exact same excuse, saying, "Oh, we're fighting for this is an existential issue for Japan. This is why we need to send our troops to China," right? I mean, like, that was their justification for their war of aggression against China. And now, hear the same language, and the Japanese prime minister threatened to send their military to waters, what China consider its own territory. That's clearly unacceptable. And this is why there was such a big issue right now that's blowing up between China and Japan. China demands the Japanese prime minister to retract her statement. And now the Japanese government is trying to wiggle their way out of it, saying like, well, by not continue to make such statement, we're basically retracting. Like, no, that's not what retraction means. That's not what retract.
They learning from the Americans.
So this is why this dispute is ongoing between China and Japan. But I think there's some domestic reasons for the Japanese prime minister to do what she did. And that's because Japan is facing some serious economic headwind right now. The Japanese economy is quietly imploding. This is driving the Japanese interest rate up, which is going to have a huge repercussion around the rest of the world as well, because for decades, for many years, Japanese central bank has been printing a lot of money, and they're keeping the interest rate artificially low, almost zero. So then a lot of Wall Street types, they thought, oh, this is a perfect arbitrage opportunity. We can borrow tons of Japanese yen at almost no interest rate and invest it in American stocks or bonds, which yield higher returns, and we just eat the difference. It's free money, right? So this is called the yen carry trade, which involved tons of money, borrowing tons of Japanese yen and investing in American assets. But now with sudden spikes in the Japanese interest rate, all these people who borrow Japanese yen, many of them borrow with margins. And now suddenly they realize, oh crap, we owe more money than we borrow. So now they have to repay back with higher interest. So a lot of them will have to unwind this trade. That means they have to start selling the American stocks. They have to sell them the U.S. treasuries in order to pay back the amount of the loans, the Japanese yen they have loaned. So this is going to have a huge repercussion on the American asset market as well. But for Japan, things are not looking good. They're already being hurting under the Trump tariff. They're getting because for unlike China has a continental size economy. The export is really like a small percentage of the Chinese GDP now. For Japan, export is still a huge part of their GDP because
Yeah.
their internal market is not big enough to absorb all of their production. So when US slapped the tariff on Japanese automakers, that is an existential issue. And this is so Japanese economy is under all kind of pressure. And this is why I think the Japanese prime minister want to distract his public from the very, very real economic implosion that's facing by the Japanese economy right now. And at the same time, she also is fulfilling the promise to her more extreme right supporters, like, hey, I can be tough on China. Look at me. I'm dishing away all the strategic ambiguity. I'm telling them we're going to deploy the Japanese military to the water of Taiwan. And so this and in addition to that, there's another dimension is the Japan-U.S. security pact, because the Japanese right wing has made that the cornerstone of their policy for the past few decades. And they thought that, because they have profited from it. Japan basically profited from being the junior partner of the U.S. empire in the East Asia. And what they saw as a result of the Xi-Trump meeting in Korea was there's a temporary truce in the tariff war. And they're reading the leaves to see which way the wind blows, and it looks like U.S. is doing a temporary pivot from a direct confrontation with China to consolidate its grips on power elsewhere, like Latin America or Africa. Right. This is why Trump is talking about is now concentrating on Venezuela. Now they're talking about Christian genocide in Nigeria, that they're gonna possibly do a military intervention. And for Japan, that's particularly the Japanese right-wing politician, that's bad news. If the U.S. leaves, they will be the one holding the bag to face the resurgent China. They don't want that. So this is a way to create a crisis in order to drag United States back. So force these Western politicians come out and to say, oh, we're in solidarity with Japan. We stand in support of Japan against China. Right. This is under this kind of backdrop. Trump now gives a call to Takaichi, and which, according to Wall Street Journal, depending on how much you believe the Wall Street Journal reporting nowadays, is that Trump told Takaichi to calm the F down, right? To chill out. And I think that is kind of the my reading of the whole ruckus. But I think this is in a way what Japan is doing is not that dissimilar from what the Europe is doing. When the European leaders claiming, oh, you know what? If the U.S. is gonna wrap up the Ukraine war, no problem. We're gonna do it alone. We're gonna carry on the burden of supplying Ukraine. I mean, which is preposterous. Nobody believes that. But what they're really trying to do is try to prolong the crisis, trying to drag United States back in. They don't want U.S. to leave, so they're the ones holding the bag. End up holding the bag. So I think that's what's going on with Japan.
Well, I'm glad you addressed the historical aspect, Carl, of the Diaoyu Islands, because a lot of people do not know the background story of this. I had it on a good authority, and I read some. I saw, as a matter of fact, I wish I could have kept. I saw a picture, not a picture, a picture of sort from an old archives from way back of where the island was part of China at that time, the empires and so forth, and that in itself later on the Japanese start to push against that one, but it was on the record there, and I'm glad you explained this one, at least from a historical perspective. One other thing I wanted to mention, since you brought up the idea of her being on the far right, I knew about her before she became, I read something that, she was a hawkish, a Chinese hawkish. I had no idea why she will be till I found out that her protege was none other than Shinzo Abe. And if we know the history of what happened between Shinzo Abe and Chinese a few years ago when he went to the memorial place, you remember that incident, right? And that right there, I put the two and two together and figured she's not up to anything good.
And there's a lot of, I mean, and she is part of the Japanese right wing that is in active support of historical revisionism. Because recently Takaichi visited Malaysia, right? And first she went to pay respect to a cemetery of the Japanese soldiers fallen in the Malaya campaign in Malaysia, and then she went to so she's Japanese, she should do that. Okay, whatever. So then she went to visit to another memorial which was erected to the British during the Malayan emergency. Now, the Malayan emergency was an anti-colonial war when the British were trying to maintain their control over their colony of British Malaya, which at that time it was between the British colonial authority and the Malayan Communist Party. Right, and the Malayan Communist Party now it has a very heavy ethnic Chinese component, and this is because the Malayan Communist Party came into being during the resistance against the Japanese colonial rule during World War II. Now, when Japan first came to take over Southeast Asia after Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese Army specifically singled out ethnic Chinese in Southeast Asia because a lot of these ethnic Chinese, they have been in support of their homeland struggle against the Japanese aggression. They've been sending a lot of money. Some of them even volunteered to go back to China to fight the Japanese. So when Japan took over Southeast Asia, they specifically targeted the Chinese community in Southeast Asia, whether in British Malaya, Singapore, or Dutch East Indies, and so this caused a lot of these ethnic Chinese population to join the resistance against the Japanese, and at that time was led by the Malayan Communist Party, and so, but after the war, after Japanese surrender, initially the British supported the insurgency against Japan. But when the British came back, it's like British okay, you commies have to give up your weapons, and so this started the anti-colonial struggle, and that's called the Malayan insurgency, and so Takaichi knew this history, yet he went to the memorial to the British soldiers in the Malayan insurgency, and then what she's trying to do is trying to link up the two. It's like, hey, look, we the Japanese and we the Western democratic allies. See, we fought on the same side. we fought those commie Chinese. You see, we're part of the same struggle, which is complete historical revisionism of what happened in World War II, right? I mean, but that's the type of the kind of the party ideology she represents. She's appealing to kind of the anti-communism part of the West to see, hey, we're actually allies together in this. So this is. It's very unfortunate that this is gonna throw a wrench into the China-Japan relationship for a long time.
For sure,
I just don't see how this is gonna resolve anytime soon.
For sure. I mean, to me, Carl, it shows literally lack of diplomatic maturity. That's basically what I put it for a prime minister, and there's knowing, and I am sure she does, knowing the history of what took place in Nanjing, for example, 1931 all the way to 1945. I mean, yeah, I was there. I went on the ground. And I saw those images in the museum. I mean, heartbreaking. I can't even talk much about all that. It's just the idea of a prime minister will provoke another country that never forget those scars. You're talking about ancestors of Chinese people that have been sacrificing and been sacrificed and been sort of died in a horrible manners. And just for her to come and say that way, that's just to me. Let alone when you look at the history of Japanese prime ministers, none of them, to my knowledge, none of them ever crossed that red line publicly. Never, to my knowledge. Shinzo Abe did what he did with the memorial visits and so forth. I want to tackle one aspect of this beside the geopolitical aspects, because we're going to talk about the Chinese response from the bigger picture, and we'll get into that. For now, I wanted to ask, from an economic perspective, did Japan think, did this Prime Minister, Sane Takashi, did she think about the economic consequences, knowing, for example, and I'll give the example of rare earth elements. Japan doesn't produce rare earth elements. Japan doesn't process rare earth elements. And it has an electronic capacity production, which needs access to rare earth elements. Chinese is going to cut off that. That's it. Why they didn't think in terms of an economic implications of such provocation, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think these politicians really care about economics. I mean, why did Trump launch the trade war, right? I mean, like that.
Right.
I think they're more concerned about in immediate terms, whether to win popular support among their voter base, whether to curry favor with their with their master in Washington, or whether to maintain their hold on power. I think that's more has more priority than how the economy is going, because the Japanese economy already took an immediate hit when the Japanese GDP, 7% of Japanese GDP is tourism, and Chinese tourists represent one of the largest segment of tourists coming to Japan. And so, they only second after South Korea. So a lot of the Chinese tourists already canceled their flights to Tokyo, their planned vacation. So that's going to hit a lot of the Japanese economy immediately. Yeah. And then there was reporting of Japan trying to seek U.S. help in furthering semiconductor sanction against China. Because there's a lot of Japanese. Yeah, there's a lot of Japanese company that's supplying components, semiconductor production components to China. So they thought, okay, but we cannot do it alone. We're going to need the help of the United States. Yeah. But again, China already showed they have the ultimate trump card, which is rare earth. They cut off the rare earth. That's it. There's no more modern industrial production. And I think Trump understood that. Trump understood that after the trade war, when China started playing the rare earth card. And I think Japan is gonna have to learn the hard way.
Yeah, for sure. There is one aspect of one behavior from the governor of Taiwan. What's his name? Li Chang-te. I think he was eating some sushi or something just to agitate the Chinese, because what he was saying is that, hey, I'm going to be, I know, Carl, I saw that and I was like, what the heck? What's wrong with this guy?
They just lifted the ban on Japanese seafood just after this incident, right? Taiwan had maintained a ban on Japanese seafood since the Fukushima incident up till now, and now the quote unquote president of Taiwan trying to cash on some points by lifting the Taiwan ban on Japanese seafood, and he publicly went on eating the seafood from Japan. That reminds me of that Obama, drinking the water from Flint, Michigan.
That's a good one. Yes, Obama did.
Yeah,
I remember that.
But this is not going to make a dent. The level of seafood import from Japan to Taiwan, doesn't even compare to the amount the Chinese market consumes. The largest market is still China. There's no way they're gonna make up for the loss of the Chinese market. Like no matter how much Fukushima sushi you're gonna consume, it's not gonna compete with the amount that you lost, by losing the Chinese market. Just like the American soybean farmer found out.
Oh yeah. Now the farmers are pissed here. I mean, once again, as I mentioned, the media is not disclosing, but the farmers are pissed at Trump. So forget about no, they don't care because their livelihood. As a matter of fact, Carl, I did read through a private investigator. He's not affiliated with any. I wish I could have kept the link. I read that some farmers here are now taking their own lives. I was heartbroken when I read that. I can only imagine a farmer taking his own life, leaving a family behind, but because he couldn't take it anymore with the losing because the Chinese not buying their stuff anymore, and because Trump caused that one. So straightforward.
That kind of news you only read before from like India. Like there was like a lot of news report of Indian farmers commit suicide because they're crushed by debt. By debt. But now, man, like United States is becoming
we have it here
country.
It's so sad. It's so sad. So I want to turn for last segment of our conversation here, Carl. I want to turn our attention to within the context of these tensions in not just Japan but Asia writ large. And there are two things now that came to mind as a geopolitical analyst, and I'm thinking about them simultaneously. One has to do with the Chinese naval capabilities, and the other one has to do with the US trying to revive the establishment of a mini-NATO in Asia within these two contexts. I know, it's kind of mind-boggling when I read about it coming out of Washington. So we'll start with the Chinese naval assets, and I would like to get your take into, first of all, where do you see the Chinese naval assets within the next 5 years? And also within this context, what was the timing for the release of the Fujian, the aircraft carrier, the Chinese aircraft carrier, which is the third one now? How do you see this playing out within the security landscape in the region?
Yeah, well, China in many ways very quickly catching up, and in some aspects surpassing the U.S. Navy capability. Just look at the Fujian aircraft carrier. It's the immediate comparison is the USS Ford, right? The most advanced aircraft carrier in the U.S. Navy. Now, Fujian, because he was newer, it was able to leapfrog in many aspects by employing different and newer technology. So, for example, the USS Ford electromagnetic catapult, which is a first. The first time electromagnetic catapult has been deployed on an aircraft carrier, but the Ford electromagnetic catapult cannot launch a F-35, which would be a serious problem because that's the main workhorse for the U.S. Fifth generation stealth fighter, and then you cannot launch it. And this is because USS Ford was, at the time when it was designed, Navy, Air Force, and Marine, they're still fighting over what kind of specs they want in F-35. So by the time they finalized F-35, USS Ford was already in production, and they just didn't expect F-35 to turn out to be so heavy. And so their catapult cannot launch it. And they can only launch the fourth generation fighter like F-18s. Now they do have steam catapults in the older U.S. aircraft carrier that can launch F-35, but there are a lot of advantages of electromagnetic catapults over steam catapults. One thing is when it became electric, you can fine dial. Like how it's much easier to for example to adjust for the different plane weight that needs to be launched when you have a electromagnetic catapult. But or you can be Trump, He said, like, you know what, screw electromagnetic cable, that's bogus. Let's go steam all the way. He's gonna be the first steampunk president. Pursuing the steam technology to the fullest. Because I think Trump is he grew up, like, his peak year is 1980s, right? So he's still stuck in the era of Top Gun, right? When like the image of the steam on the deck of aircraft carrier, it looks so cool. That's what we're gonna stick with. And so this is another the reason that Fujian was able to do this launch the Chinese fifth generation stealth fighters, the J-35, is because one is newer, and they also use DC current instead of AC current.
Wow.
So by the time they lay out Fujian, they already know what J-35 is going to look like. And there's also a report that Xi Jinping himself intervened personally in the construction of Fujian to instruct them to actually put in an electromagnetic catapult.
Wow.
And and then it's not confirmed. On many sources claim that that's the case. But he uses the latest technology, and it could launch fifth generation aircraft. Now, for U.S., people can say, well, we still have other conventional aircraft carriers that could launch J-35, F-35.
F-35.
Look, a lot of the Nimitz class carrier, they're older than me. They're due to retire in like a few years. I mean, they like. How long can you keep float a like more than 50+ year old Hulk? So that is one problem, and the problem is the real problem is still the manufacturing capability. The U.S. Pentagon admitted China has 230 times the naval shipbuilding capability than the United States. So even to replace all these Nimitz class aircraft carrier that's due to retire, U.S. will not be able to produce aircraft carrier at scale large enough, the same way that China will be able to, because China is already on their way to construct their fourth aircraft carrier, and which is going to be nuclear powered. And like on paper, U.S. has like 11, 12 aircraft carriers, but
11,
in practice,
11, but some of them very old, Carl. Some of them very old. They're not going to keep up with the technology.
In practice, they could only keep like four aircraft carrier battle group deployed, active deployment at any time. And so China is very quickly catching up in that aspect, and going forward, that gap is going to increasingly shrink, and in many aspects, as I mentioned, they already start surpassing the U.S. Navy. This is the problem that the Pentagon recognizes, and their solution is, we know what the problem is. We know because we hollow out our manufacturing base so much that we lack the capability. Not a problem. We can go to our allies, South Korea and Japan, to help us. and so that is their solution. That's our solution. Their solution, because there's a U.S. law actually prohibits warship from being built in foreign countries. So they're like, well, okay, what if we just retrofit our ships? We have a lot of ships that we need to retrofit. We just retrofit them in the Korean and Japanese shipyard. So that's what they're doing. This is why they're trying very hard to loop in Korea and Japan into forming like a mini Asian NATO. Right. And then there's also like NATO itself talking about expanding their presence in Asia Pacific, which I think that's ridiculous. They're going to sell like, like the British keep on talking about selling their aircraft carrier from into South China Sea. But well, like Britain, really? I mean, like you can barely keep your aircraft carrier afloat right now.
Floating.
Like they have two aircraft carrier. Britain, they have like the Prince of Wales and the HMS Elizabeth, but
HMS.
they had so much problems. They had to cannibalize one for parts for the maintenance of the other. So like for to think that they will be able to do something in South China Sea, I mean it's ridiculous. But for US, the problem is the same. It's because there's so few US shipyard now. They're gonna have to depend on Korea and Japan to do a lot of heavy lifting. But look, if you're gonna put all your eggs in that basket, if a war break out, guess what? All your shipyard that you will be depend on is all within Chinese missile range. That is a fact. That's so that's still not going to solve the problem of the tyranny of distances. Because U.S. Navy basically have to cross the entire Pacific to fight China in China's backyard, and U.S. Navy is also facing other problems like recruitment. They have to lower so many standards now for recruitment because they can't get enough sailors to sign up, because hey, nobody wants to die for Israel, or go die for Taiwan, and so that those U.S. Navy is probably have most apparent problems of all the three all the major branches of U.S. military, but U.S. Navy just happened to be the one that will have to depend on to fight China. And they have all these problems with all these old ships that can't be replaced. They can't get enough sailors, and they're having helicopters and F-18s crashing out of sky in South China Sea, and China hasn't even fired a shot. So these are the problems that they are. These are again self-inflicted problems, and I don't expect them to go away anytime soon.
Or like what happened also, Carl, with the U.S. submarine that hit Iraq and they're in South China Sea, which had nothing to do with Iraq. That's a conversation for another day. So, but on a serious note, Carl, is this why based on what you mentioned for the Chinese naval capabilities? I read the statement by the Ministry of Defense, the Chinese Ministry of Defense, when they used the term, and I put in quotes, crushing defeat for the Japanese. Is this in a sort of a message from the Chinese to the Japanese regarding the naval capabilities, or to the US for that matter?
Well, I have to read the original Chinese statement, because a lot of times there's some willful mistranslations into English.
I read it,
But basically right now China is trying to remind Japan not to stir up trouble in Asia Pacific, and it's because they're really pissed about this latest crossing of the red line. Because it's a Taiwan issue for China. That's a sovereignty issue. People are trying to make a case. I see so many people saying, "Oh, but Taiwan is already independent." Oh, when did Taiwan declare independence? They're gonna declare independence from what? From which country? So those are the questions you need to answer. But anyway, so right now, I don't foresee a problem, immediate problem breaking out over war over Taiwan Strait. I have maintained this for a long time, especially between mainland China and Taiwan. But if a third power is gonna try to get involved, then it's touch and go. It's the possibility for war increased dramatically. So China is just sending out that warning right now, say, hey, like, don't want to mess with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Carl, I can't thank you enough, my friend, for really sharing your knowledge, your insights, your perspective, and the historical snapshot about the islands. A lot of people do not know that history. That's why they couldn't get it, as to understanding the complexities of what's going on in the Ryukyu Islands. And So I'm glad you were able to join me here, share that knowledge with the community. And on behalf of the community, we say thank you so much for carving out time for us. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much, Carl. Truly appreciate you. Hi, guys. Hope you enjoyed listening to Carl. Is a wealth of knowledge, literally. And it's always nice to hear the historical facts regarding that part of the world. So hope you enjoy your weekend here. I'm not gonna do any live stream tomorrow. Is the weekend, and I'll be working on some stories for you for next week, and hope you just enjoy the rest of the week here. Chill out, just do nothing, just chill out. So look forward to seeing you next time. As always, remember, geopolitics impact your daily life in more ways than one. Till next time, bye bye.